Hey there, I'm Jeff Elkins, and this is the Dialogue Doctor Podcast. Today on the podcast, Dialogue Doctor Coach Laura Humm sits down with author Liz Woodiwiss to talk about world building and maximizing emotions for a greater impact. Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Dialogue Doctor Podcast. Super glad you're here this week. Just a quick announcement before we get to the episode with Laura, which is a really great episode. But quick announcement before we get there. If you have not joined our community, if you're not a member of the Dialogue Doctor community, we would love to have you. We do all kinds of amazing things together. We meet twice a month over Zoom. Last week, we met to talk about The Client by John Grisham. And this week, we are meeting to talk about the short story Emergency by Dennis Johnson. We're a learning community, so we're constantly looking at these great works and trying to learn together. We also have Monday and Friday accountability. We have Tuesday writing prompt, and then we do a Wednesday larger prompt, learning prompt from the community. Right now, we're looking at snippets from great works from master writers. So it's a great community, super supportive, very encouraging. We would love for you to come and join. So come to dialoguedoctor.com and click on the community button in the menu, or patreon.com/Jeff Elkins. We would love to have you. All right, I think that's it. I think that's all the announcements. Let's get to this episode with Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Humm. I'm one of the Dialogue Doctor coaches, and I am here today with Liz Woodiwiss, and we are going to talk about one of the big introduction scenes in your story today, right?
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your writing journey, and the piece we're going to work on?
Sure. So I have been writing since I was about 12 years old, so it's been a few minutes. And I have always loved fantasy, especially epic fantasy with broad scopes and big themes and lots of books in the series. And so when I set out to write a book, I knew it was always going to just be the first part of what was going to turn into a long series. So this book is book number 1 in an epic series. It's something that I've been dreaming about and working on since, like I said, I was about 12. And so it's been in the works for a long time. I just finished writing my first draft about 3 months ago, and I'm now in the editing process. So that brings us here.
Okay, great. And this is early on in your story.
Yes.
So if you could tell us a little bit about your story, do you have a single POV or do you have multiple POVs in this story?
It's mostly single point of view. The main character, Terry, is the point of view that pretty much this entire book is shown through. I do have a few scenes scattered throughout from a couple of different point of views to just kind of start tying in some threads from different parts of the world and different things, but I would say probably 95% of the book is in his point of view.
Okay, great. And you mentioned he's 12? I'm sorry,
14.
14. And did you
Yes.
just mention that, or was that in your email? I'm sorry.
I think it was in my email.
Okay. I was like,
That's
wait,
okay.
I thought
I
I knew
was 12
this.
when I started, so
You were 12 when you
that's where
started.
the 12
Okay, that's
years old
right.
came.
All right. Well, I'll forgive myself just a little bit there
Yes.
for the 12. Okay, so he's 14. What's his place in this world? You've got him at the very beginning of your epic fantasy. What's kind of his place?
So starting out, he's just your average village boy who's, had a very quiet, fairly normal life, except for one thing. He lives with his godmother and doesn't have any knowledge of who his parents were. And as far as he knows, they're dead, and his godmother, just took him in and raised him. And so he has grown up, in this village. He's, has no real connection to the outside world. So this scene is pretty much that first experience of, oh, the world's bigger than this little village that I've grown up in.
Okay. And the village right now is starting to see and feel some turmoil from the outside world. How much does Terry know and feel about the outside pressures?
very little up until this scene. And now he's starting to realize that there's a lot that's going on.
Okay.
And, as we progress through this scene and the following, 8 to 10 scenes afterward, his horizons expand very quickly until he ends up leaving the village and going to the city. So,
Okay, sounds great. So tell us a little bit about what your goal is for this scene, what you struggled with, and what you're hoping this scene does for your book. Because it's not your first scene, but it
no.
seems like it's a pivotal moment in your story.
It definitely is a pivotal moment. So this is the scene where, like I was saying, it's where everybody in the village, as well as our main character Terry, start to really understand that there's a lot of conflict, a lot of tension, a lot of danger in the world outside of their little community that is distant enough from the larger cities of the world that they haven't been heavily impacted until earlier in the same day. Terry and his best friend Karn were out hunting in the forest and came across this group of really rough, dirty men who were, kind of camping and talking about some not so nice stuff and what they were going to do to the nearby villages. And they start to realize, oh, this is not good. We got to go back and tell the adults. And then they call a village council, and that's where we are now.
So this is the village council meeting.
Yes.
Okay. What was your biggest struggle in writing this scene?
I don't know that I necessarily struggled in writing the scene, but now that I'm going back, I'm realizing how much information I jammed in there and how much is changing, how much is shifting. It's the point where Terry, kind of is being noticed by the other, like by the adult villagers, so he's
Mhm.
just at that age where he's starting to, kind of push it his boundaries and go, okay, I'm going to be an adult soon too, and I want people to sort of pay attention to me, but I also don't want them to pay attention to me because I'm kind of a shy, reserved kid. And so there's
Mhm.
that is happening. And then of course for the village as a whole, the villagers are starting to realize that their safe and protected status that they've, always felt is the norm is now going to change. And that even though there's this whole thing, which we'll get into a little bit later in the scene, there's a valley nearby where a special kind of plant grows that has a fiber that this lace is created from. And Terry's godmother happens to be the one who is, makes the lace, and that's like her trade. And so she makes really beautiful fine lace, and it gets noticed by the queen. And that's starting to draw attention to their village from that direction. And then, of course, these, brigands that they're finding out in the woods are bringing attention from a different direction.
Mhm. So this is like the understanding that the world that Terry lives in isn't just happy-go-lucky. This is kind of that
Mhm.
I'm pulling the wool away from my eyes and I'm really
Yep.
starting to see and understand. Great. Um, you've got a lot of characters in this scene.
Yes.
And
It's
it's
definitely a big
because
cat scene.
yeah, because you've got a town council meeting here. Um, what is it you mentioned a few minutes ago? I'm going to take a step back because it's going to help us move forward. I hope. I have a grand plan. We'll see. When you mentioned that you love reading fantasy, specifically epic fantasy.
Yes.
What is it that you love so much about epic fantasy?
I think for me, it's in a big part, it's the, escape to a different world, but it's also the um, a kind of a unique way to frame the problems and the challenges that we are dealing with in our world
Hmm.
in a way that we can kind of take a step back and address them, work through them, and then go, okay, now we've come to a solution in this world, and now we can maybe take a step back into our world and, hopefully move forward in a healthy way instead of maybe the unhealthy way that our characters might choose to go through
Nice.
these problems.
Nice. And would you say that you enjoy the intellectual problem solving, the emotional problem solving, or the combination of both as you're reading?
Definitely the combination.
A combination of both. Okay. So the reason that I wanted to think about and to frame what you enjoy about the reading that you do in this genre is it's going to help us to use that as a touchstone as we move forward in the editing of this scene. So you
Mhm.
sent me about 3,500 words, and um, you've got a couple of points in this scene where you've got big cast talking, and then you kind of go into the smaller conversation, and then you draw back into the big cast scene. And exactly what you were talking about the thing that you love about reading is happening here. There's a big problem that's happening. We can't necessarily take it on by ourselves, so we need to create a plan in order to move forward. And then once we have that plan, we can kind of all band together and move forward.
Mhm.
So, from the standpoint of this is Terry's realization that his world isn't kind of as quaint and as safe as he thought it was, what does this scene do in your epic fantasy for Terry? Does it make him scared and make him want to hide? Does it make him angry and want to fight? Does it make him go into like his intellectual? What does it do for the beginning of your story, knowing that your whole epic fantasy is going to follow Terry?
Yes. So I think um, what this scene is going to do is first and foremost, I think it's opening his eyes. Giving him access to knowledge that he did not have before, and it's
Mm-hmm.
taking him outside of, that sheltered, the world kind of revolves around me perspective that
Mm-hmm.
most teenagers have,
Yep. It's not
to
all about me.
suddenly going, whoa, there's all of this stuff happening in the world that I had no idea about, and these people are being hurt. And suddenly he has this, I imagine him as listening to the conversations around him and going, how can I help? What can I do to make a difference? And
Okay.
that's like that catalyst that's going to push him later to move forward throughout the book, and probably make some stupid choices later on, but
Sure.
you know, we'll
Okay.
get there.
So this is your call to action scene.
Yeah.
Okay. So everything that we want to do in this scene, we want to focus on that progression of naive youngster who kind of has everything he wants and everything he needs. His godmother has been giving him, all the safety, all the protection, all the love, all the support. He's got a best friend, right? Like things are going pretty well for him. We're going to challenge him with a, hey, the world isn't what you actually think the world is.
Mhm.
And you're going to give him a choice of, what do you do about that? Do you continue to hide in your 14-year-old life, or do you become a part of the solution in any way that you can, knowing that if the grown-ups can't figure it out, well, you can help, but you're not necessarily going to be the hero of the story yet. We know
Yes.
probably later he's going to be more into the hero. Okay, great. So the reason that I wanted to get all of that goal set up is because lots of times when we have big cast scenes tied with scenes where there is a ton of information being dumped, our first draft is all about getting the story out, and we don't necessarily focus on, why am I telling the reader this information? So,
Yeah.
personally, as a person who enjoys reading fantasy but has a hard time usually with epic fantasy because the story dumps can get so heavy, I get very overwhelmed. By the time you introduce me to the fourth character, I'm like, too many characters, I'm out. Like I really need a
Yep.
solo story. I don't really like a solo story, but like
Yeah.
I start to get a little overwhelmed. And then you bring in this part of the kingdom and this part, not you specifically, but like
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
fantasy writing. Like you're bringing all of this stuff in, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, if I have to juggle all this stuff in my real life, and then I also have to know it in my fantasy world, then I start to get overwhelmed. So I love having
Yes.
the opportunity to talk to authors because, in my opinion, if you move the emotions of the scene first and then use the information pieces to spear the emotion that you want me to feel, then as a reader, you're tricking me into learning about your story because all I think I'm doing is feeling something.
Yes.
So you get kind of the best of both worlds in that. So
Yes, I love
that's
that.
fantastic. That's what I want to do with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you what you sent to me using the notes feature. So because there was so much information and I had an idea of the direction you were going with your goal, but there were a couple of places where I was like, wait, maybe this isn't the goal. So most of what I've done right here is notes. We'll go through the notes. I'll show you the places where, as a reader, I started to get pulled a little bit away from the story in
Hmm.
places where it felt like you really wanted me to lean into the story. Once we've done the diagnostics of it, we'll put together a plan that will allow you to do the same thing that you're doing in a much more highly engaging way. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, fantastic. So if you or any of the listeners, assuming anyone is listening, um, have heard any of our recent editing stuff using the Hire Casey process,
Hmm.
this, what I've done in your sheet, is all the highlighting and review, which is the higher part of Hire Casey. So in it, I was highlighting different elements. In this case, specifically, I was highlighting new information. I was also highlighting point of view changes. And the review is the what did I think of this as a reader. Some of it I didn't note because I wanted to talk to you about it, again, with the idea of kind of what your goal was in here. But if you are looking to do Hire Casey, the highlight and review, this is an excellent example of how we use that in the editing process.
Perfect.
Questions before we get started?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, sounds great. So you start here with Terry's point of view. Terry has obviously had a really big day and is changing his clothes and is anxious to head back to the village. My big question here was, where's he going? Why is he anxious? You give us a little bit of a recap of what's happened, but I presumably read this in chapters 1 through 4.
Hmm.
So rather than giving me the recap of where he's worried and why he's anxious, because again, you're giving me the intellectual of why had these men chosen this camp, who were they waiting for, what about all the people in the mountains? These are very specific questions. They aren't helping me understand the anxiety of why Terry is heading into the town, excuse me, into the village. So then we move a little bit further and we have him arriving at the tavern. So he arrives, he meets his best friend, and now we start meeting everyone else. We meet Garrick. We meet a strange woman that Terry's never seen before. Presumably, in a village this small, a stranger is kind of a big deal. But we don't necessarily see the impact of this stranger to Terry himself. He's still kind of wondering about the day.
Hmm.
But he does ask Garrick, or he does ask his friend who's with Garrick. And then we learn about the fact that she's a visitor from the movement, but we have no introduction to what the movement is, and how that ties to today's meeting. Go
So
ahead.
that was explained earlier. So,
Okay. So, and this is one of those things about the movement being explained in an earlier chapter, similar to the fact that all of these things up here were explained in a similar chapter. Sometimes it's good to say a visitor from the movement who's trying to help in the village or in the area to fight the prince's new taxation, whatever it is. Just a
mhm,
couple of more words doesn't necessarily have to be in the quotation mark, because one of the things that you'll probably notice as we go through this is, how does Terry feel about this? And this is how you bring your story from an intellectual, these are all the things that are happening, to that beautiful fantasy world of, how does it feel to live in this world? How does it feel for this 14-year-old to know that there's a movement going on? Right? Like, what are all these adults talking about? Everything's fine. Like, me and my best friend just spent the day picking flowers, right? Presumably that's part. It was more than that, but like, right, like my world hasn't changed. Why is there movement? Why is everybody around me so abuzz about this? So bringing Terry's perspective into the story at every moment, especially because 14 is one of those areas of our lives where you could never pay me enough to go back to being 14. But when you think about being 14, you mentioned it earlier, where it's like, I'm about to be an adult, right? Like at 14, I kind of
mhm.
feel like I should have all the responsibilities of an adult. I feel like I can handle the world around me. But then one bad thing happens, and I'm like, nope, I'm out. I'm not being an adult yet, right? Like it's
Yeah.
so everything kind of feels fresh and new.
Mhm,
That's one of the things that readers love about reading that transition age years stories, is like, if I could see the world through that lens of innocence, turning away from innocence again, that's what you want to put in here. You want at every moment you can Terry to be thinking about the world the way a 14-year-old boy starts to see the world, right? He sees this
mhm,
strange young woman. Maybe he's surprised that the representative of the movement is a woman. Maybe he thinks she's too pretty to be part of this. Maybe he thinks that she's too old, or he thinks, she could never be the face of the movement. Like, whatever it is, teenagers are very judgy. Let some of
mhm.
that
Yes, they are.
right? Right? Let some of that judgment come across. All of these things. And you mentioned earlier, they're very egocentric, right? Like
Mhm,
everything revolves around them. Up here, when he's changing his clothes to go into the village, is he excited about going into the village? Is he proud that he's being invited to the council for the first time? Is he mad that he's being invited into the council because these dumb men were in the mountains? He wanted to be invited because he has something to say or something to add, right? Like, think about all of those moments of like the teenage angst that you can throw into the story. Because all of a sudden, if you're putting a grumpy teenager who's mad because they have to change their clothes, this shirt's fine, and but Marion would be so mad at me if I didn't change my clothes. I don't understand why she cares about this so much. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to be looking at me. They're all just going to be worried about the stranger from the movement. And what about this movement? And do we really need this? Are the adults here just blowing everything out of proportion? Now all of a sudden, everything that you've told me has emotional weight to it. So I'm kind of tricked into learning that, oh wait, there's a movement and somebody's coming, and right, like, so that's just
mhm.
kind of the trick to hiding your vegetables, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. So once we start introducing the other characters, the more the other characters are speaking, the less of Terry we start to get. almost to the point where it feels like you are using a omniscient narrator.
Mhm.
You'll have elements where um, the other characters will have a little bit of backstory in their paragraphs. There's not a great example of it in this first section, but there are some examples of it as we go. What you want to do here is, because Terry's your POV character, you want Terry um, to kind of narrate what's happening, right? So when Karen's pa and the blacksmith enter, um, Terry notices that Karen straightens his shirt a little bit because he doesn't want to embarrass his pa. And maybe he has a moment where he thinks, what would it be like to have a pa? Or, Marion's everything that he needs, but he kind of wishes that he had that relationship. And then when Smitty starts to talk and they start doing the introductions, Terry's unsure what he's supposed to do because Karen's dad pulls him into the conversation and Terry just kind of follows. Is he supposed to? Is he supposed to hang back? Right? Like, again, putting that emotionality into what's happening helps us with the introduction, because if you can do that, then as you introduce each person, and you'll see there are a lot of new people coming
Mhm.
in these 3 paragraphs, each one of them can say something to Terry specifically. I heard about, um, you know, what I heard about the information you got on the men. That was really great. I can't wait to talk to you about it later. Or, hey, how's Marion doing? I'm sorry she couldn't come tonight. Something so that we're seeing the relationship that Terry has with each one of these adults. Now, it's a choice to do that because it is going to expand your scene, but it's going to make each person feel like they're part of the community as Terry sees the community, as opposed to right now, each person you're bringing in, you're telling us who they are to the village. So we can see the importance of the villagers working together. But is it the village's story or is it Terry's story? So
Mhm.
I just gave you a lot to think about as it relates to point of view. Before I move on
Yeah.
to some of the other details, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that all makes really good sense. And I really like the concept, back at the beginning of, putting a little bit more thought into Terry's head of, how he's feeling in the moment, because he has had a really big day. There's a lot of stuff that has already happened. He's struggling to process it. He's leaving a conversation with his godmother where he had kind of filled her in on the things that had happened and gotten her perspective on a few things, and realized that she's, knows a lot of stuff and has chosen not to tell him. So he's a little bit resentful of that. And he's very excited to come into the village and, be one of the adults, so to speak, gets
Mm-hmm.
to go to the village council, and that's super cool. But he's going to have to talk in front of everybody, and he's not really sure about that. And, so there's a lot of that, I think can come in to really frame his state of mind. And then I like the idea of the introductions. When I was writing this, I was, as you can probably tell, I was just trying to get all the people in the room
Yeah.
because there's a lot of them. But
Yeah.
I like that idea of them being more acknowledging of him and drawing him in, but also, um, maybe not everybody acknowledges him because
Mm-hmm.
he's just a kid, like, oh yeah, you're here to talk about what you saw, but, just stay over there in the corner with your buddy. Some people will have that
Mm-hmm.
idea, where others, I think, will probably be like, oh yeah, hey, how are things going? So I think I can
Mm-hmm.
maybe find a balance in between.
Yeah, I really like that, especially if he's nervous about speaking in front of them, like having a couple of them, because presumably his godmother, who's making this lace that is obviously very important, not just to the town, I mean, the queen spoiler, the queen is coming to buy some of her lace, right? Like this is, she's important. So presumably a couple of people in the town really look out for Terry. And those are the people who are probably telling him, you can do this, this is important, all those things. Quick question from a storyline perspective. Is this a planned council meeting or is this council meeting called specifically because of what Terry and Karn saw?
It's impromptu. It's due to what they saw.
Okay.
So they had come into the village earlier in the day, told Karn's pa what had happened, and he arranged the council meeting.
Okay. So because of that, because Terry and Karn are the ones who are going to be like the star of this show, put a little bit more, maybe think about putting a little bit more pressure on them and making the agenda of this council meeting to hear what they have to say, because what happens next is we meet everybody, and then they eat, and as they eat, Garrick stands up. Garrick's the mayor, if I remember right. He stands up and he kind of gives the backstory of everything that's happening. And then each of the villagers kind of talks about the impact that that had on, is having on their lives. If you turn this around and really focus on the impromptu nature of what happens, it becomes less of a history lesson and more of an impact, because the boys can stand up and one of them can, like, they can look at each other a little bit and be like, I don't know, where do we start? And then Karen's dad, who right now, Karen's dad is very gentle with the boys. They like speak up kind of at the wrong time, and he's like, no, it's okay, you're going to be an adult soon. And then later on they start talking about the flowers and what happened with the flowers, and he kind of again brings everybody's attention back into it. If you have Karen's dad kind of being the MC and asking them a couple of questions, because he doesn't want to tell the story for the boys. He really wants everyone to hear what happened because he wants them to be able to tell the details, right? So as they're telling the story, let the other people in the room ask questions about the impact. So instead of this big section, one quick note about highlighting, you'll notice at about this point, the highlighting changes and the new information comes in the comments instead of in the sheet, because I was finding that I was highlighting so much that almost everything was green, and I was getting a little bit overwhelmed. So I started to move it over. The other reason I moved it into the comments is because you can then, when you see it all aligned, you can start deciding what's the most important thing to come into the story. So if the most important thing is the fact that they overheard these men planning a raid on one of the other towns, then somebody from the town can say, did you hear where they're going to go? And the boys can say the name of the town. And then instead of them saying, about the taxes, they can say, my cousin lives there, we have to do something. Or it can become more of a personal story instead of a history lesson of how we got here. And then maybe, they had a bag of gold coins that they were using to play some kind of poker game. And then somebody in the town in the village can say something like, they have all that money because of all the taxes that the princes, that's the rent money that the people in the lower city, they confiscated that. Now all of these elements that you want to tell in the story become emotionally investment. Oh, that is the weirdest sentence. It becomes an emotional investment about all of these details,
Yeah.
instead of this is where we are, this is what's happened, this is how we get here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it does.
Okay. And again, these are the places where, as each person speaks, you are telling kind of their whole story, and it gets a little bit more into the actions that you give them are really good. Rosa glanced around the table, Layla cleared her throat. Those are really good elements that you want to put in there, but then let Terry interpret them, right? Rosa glanced around the table and Terry sunk down in his chair. He didn't want her to look directly at him. Layla cleared her throat, and um, Terry wondered, is this the first time she's been to the council meeting? Or he didn't know that she attended council meetings on the regular basis, whatever it is, right? Like, however you decide, some of these things that they're saying about themselves, let them come through the lens of how Terry sees them instead of how they see themselves. For example, because we're on Layla, sorry, this is getting a little bit deeper into the story than I had wanted to. I was going to come back to this, but we're here, so I'm going to say it. So Layla clears her throat. I'm just a humble baker. Well, I've been a member of the village council for a few years now. Politics isn't one of my strengths. So here she is, kind of like, before she even speaks, she's putting up barriers to what she's going to say. Versus if you just have her say something like, how do we know that the prince is to blame for these attacks? And then Terry, through his 14-year-old brain, can be like, she's just a baker. What does she know? Doesn't the mayor know about this? Like, isn't he getting this information from other mayors? Like, and he can kind of like just brush her off. So then it doesn't look like Layla, who's part of the council, is not sure of her role.
Mm.
He's unsure of her role, not the
Yeah.
other way around. So just little things like that allow it again, because let's face it, 14-year-olds are judgy. Let them judge, right?
Yes.
Okay, so as you're doing this, the other big element that you have in the story is Rosa's story. Rosa was in a village that was plundered by every sense of the word. She got
Mhm.
away with burns on her body and escaped barely with her life. Everyone she loves is gone. But when she tells her story, it is a very clinical telling. This is what happened. This is where we are. Let's use that to force a movement. And then this is the place where Terry starts to kind of have that awakening of, oh, wait, the world isn't what the world is what I thought it was, right? Like, this is
Yeah.
really kind of the changing point for him.
Hmm.
This should be the climax of your story. Everything should be building up to this. And if you are able to turn the story around and make the council meeting to be about the boys, it can be first about the men that they saw in the woods, and that can help you tell the story about what the prince is doing and how things are going so badly because of all the taxes, and you can bring in the pirates there. And then Karen's dad can say, okay, now tell the point about the flowers, because that's an important part too. Right now, you'll notice it in my notes here. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because the summary of the story goes for a while. And then once they make a decision that they're going to do something, then there's some discussion about it. There's a plan being put in place. And then it kind of separates again. And then it's just the boys talking. And that's when they bring up the plant. And somehow Rosa is standing right behind them as soon as they say this, talk about the core. Um, and then that brings it all back together. If you take this part and you pair it with, you all had a big day, you saw two things, maybe if you had just seen one of these things, we wouldn't have had a town council. Karen's dad would have just told everybody, but there were two things we need to discuss both and the impact of both of them together. Then once all that stuff happens, then they can turn to Rosa. And Rosa can be like, okay, you all are exactly where my village was 3 weeks ago. And that can be the culmination of, right? Because Terry at some point can be like, okay, we're talking about this stuff, but what do we do about it, right? Like things are getting bad because of the prince. How are we going to protect this other group? Can we go by ourselves? Maybe he says the thing about why isn't the king doing anything about it? Like when he speaks up when he's not supposed to. But if he's kind of the center of attention, maybe he's supposed to, and that can change. And then Rosa can be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. I am here because I am pulling together information or people for the movement. And then you can have the village be untrusting of her as much as she's untrusting of them. Because right now you have it because somebody's brother or son introduced him to Rosa,
Mm-hmm.
there's an immediate bond. Rosa walks in and everybody's kind of openly sharing with her and she's openly sharing with them. But where are all the prince's spies? Where are all the adversaries in this? What is it going to take for them to trust her? And what is it going to take for her to trust them? Especially because the story is being told from Terry's point of view. Terry knows you mentioned that he's kind of sheltered. He lives
Mm-hmm.
in this village. If he knows there's a stranger in the room, he's already nervous about talking in front of the council. Is he also going to talk in front of a stranger? Right? Like, and then that story that Rosa is telling about the trauma and the horrors that she saw, that's her credibility with Terry. And Terry's knowledge of what he saw, filtered obviously through the lens of what Marion told him, is what's going to make Rosa trust him.
Mm.
And then that changes the emotional trajectory of your story. Does that all make sense?
Kind of. I think I'm tracking
Okay.
with you.
All right. What part felt like it made sense? What part didn't? And then we'll actually map it out for you.
Okay, so I think, emotionally what you're saying makes sense. I know for sure that I definitely need to get into Terry's point of view more and
Mm-hmm.
what he's actually thinking and processing. Because this scene is very distant. It's very much the fly on the
Mm-hmm.
wall watching things go on and not in anybody's
Mm-hmm.
specific interpretation. So, um, and I'm totally okay with reframing how the events go down.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a way to either condense or just to streamline things so that it flows more naturally. What I had I don't remember if I said much in this scene about what the men in the woods talked about. I think I just kind of
Mm-hmm.
had the boys just
Mm-hmm.
giving a summary. But the stuff that they were talking about in the woods is very relevant to what Rosa's story involves. So they've already
Mm-hmm.
had a little bit of a hint that, this not good stuff is going on. And then Rosa's story takes it and makes it very personal.
Mm-hmm.
So I want her story to come after what they're sharing.
Mm-hmm.
However else I frame it, just because I feel like that's going to amplify the
Mm-hmm.
emotional resonance, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I love that. Right now, she tells her story before they tell their story. So
Okay.
I like what you're saying
Yeah.
about flipping it around, especially because oftentimes when we hear bad things are coming, I am the biggest perpetrator of this. In Maryland, we get snowy weather like once every 3 years. But every year there's this huge announcement on the television that there's going to be the biggest snowstorm and we're going to get 12 inches and everybody runs to the grocery store and buys milk, bread, and toilet paper, right? Like this happens every single year. And I've a ploy to get the television stations to play this in July just to see what'll happen. But like every time this happens, I'm always like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And
Yep.
then when it actually does snow, I'm like, snowed? That happened, right? Like it's like, oh, wait, it actually did snow. Okay, well, Good thing I have toilet paper, right? Like whatever. Um, but the reason that I bring that up is there's always going to be a naysayer amongst a village like this, right? Like somebody is always going to be like, you all are overreacting. They're just 14-year-old boys. We're really going to create some kind of movement based off of what two 14-year-old boys, like they maybe made the whole thing up. And then maybe you don't have to go that far, but like
Yeah.
adding a naysayer into it as the boys are talking, or he's challenging them. Did you hear what did they say anything about such and such? And the boys can like look at each other and be like, no, but they talked about this other thing. Is that helpful? Right? Like, because being the first time of the council, they probably don't really know what's expected of them. Right. So letting that kind of play out where there's tension amongst the villagers and not necessarily from Terry and his friend, but that's when Rosa can step in and be like, okay, my village was in exactly the same place you all are. We said exactly the same thing, and now I'm the only one that survives. And they can be like, well, we don't know you. And then the person who knows them can be like, so and so knows them. And then maybe she's even like, you don't believe me. And then maybe she shows them the scars on the back of her leg. Instead of
Mhm.
just saying, I have the scars on my body, he shows them. And then Terry can like see Rosa through totally different eyes. Like, not only is everything that he's hearing today changing his entire understanding of the world, but she is like living proof that the whole world isn't safe the way that he thought it was. Right? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So, any other questions before we start talking about a plan?
Um, I guess I think my other question, and maybe this will come
Mm-hmm.
in, is just what is it going to look like? Um, Let me see if I can think how I want to ask this. But when I'm putting Terry's thoughts and feelings and emotions and everything in, um, I obviously I don't want to just tell what he's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to feel more organic and natural. And that's one of the things that I
Mm-hmm.
personally struggle with a little bit more is how to and a lot of my rough drafts tend to look like this, where I'm just
Mm-hmm.
expressing the
Telling the
story and I don't
story.
have a lot
Yeah.
of emotion in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting down to that level, what does that look like? Like I have, as Rosa shared her
Mm-hmm.
story, Terry grew more and more angry. And I'm like, well, yeah, he's angry, but how do I actually show that he's getting angry
Yeah.
because he's already heard the guys in the woods talking about doing this stuff. And now here's
Right.
somebody in front of him that's like a real person that has experienced and gone through what they were
Mm-hmm.
saying they were going to do. And, he's horrified, but how do I get that across?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is instead of the larger paragraphs of story, you want smaller elements of things that were happening. Rosa stands up and she says, you all are part of the problem. And somebody else says, we're not the problem, the prince is the problem. And somebody else says, what do you mean we're part of the problem? We're talking about a solution. And she's like, you all aren't doing anything. And then
Mhm.
somebody else says, well, what do you want to do? And Terry looks at his best friend and they just kind of shrug and they're like, what should we do? Maybe one of them points to the chair and they kind of like, sit back down, right? And then the conversation goes on. And Rosa says, my village leaders were saying exactly the same thing that you're saying, only we didn't have two boys who actually saw the camp. We just we just knew that it happened to the village before us. And then somebody else can shout, what actually happened? And then Terry can lean over to his friend and be like, have you heard her story? Right? Like, not everything has to happen in the center of the action. And they like shake their head and they look at each other. And Rose is like, my village had, I don't know, 75 people in it, and I'm the only one that's left alive. And Terry looks at his friend, and his eyes are really big, and he says, she's the only one. And then he looks back at Rosa and he watches Rosa look each person in the eye, and he's seeing what she's doing, and he starts to squirm in his chair right before she looks at him, but he's sure that he's not going to look away, and she looks at him and he looks back at her, and she says, my 16-year-old sister was violated and murdered while I watched. I tried to stop them and I couldn't. And Terry thinks about what would he do if he was watching somebody. He would do everything he could. And she continues to tell her story while tears are streaming down her face. And so giving her emotion and giving him emotion. And at some point, he also has to look around the room and watch other people. So tears
Mhm.
are streaming down her face, but her voice is strong. He's feeling more uncomfortable, so he stops looking at her and he starts looking at other people. And the bartender whose daughter was walking around, he's held her close and he's got his arm around her. And Terry's glad he doesn't have a sister. And then he looks at his best friend's dad, and his best friend's dad won't meet his eyes, right? Like all of these things, you want to show the whole room's impact on the story,
Mhm.
not just telling the story itself, but
Yeah.
breaking the story down into shorter pieces. And I always recommend a really emotional story like this. You start with the most emotional point. So the fact that her sister was violated and murdered in front of her, that should be like the key point of the story, and the other details. And then I watched a house burn down, and I watched my father, try to get to my sister, and they held him, so he had to watch. And I tried to crawl out from where she was under maybe her mother's body or whatever it was, right? Like let the story come out small bit by small bit, and let everyone respond to it. Does
Okay.
that help?
Yeah, that definitely helps.
Okay. So that's what you're going to do for that particular beat. One of the things that I want us to look at is a beat planning sheet. You can do this any way you want. Sometimes I do it really linearly. Sometimes I use a chart like this so I can kind of see the flow of things. But the first thing that we want to do is we want to give the title a scene, give the scene a title. So I just named it council meeting. And the goal is for Terry to see the world isn't as safe as he thought.
Mhm.
Okay. And Terry is your vehicle. And then you have a lot of other characters. So, what I would recommend is that you pick three-ish, maybe four primary characters, and let everyone else kind of be a chorus, meaning that their
Yeah.
voices can be interchangeable. It doesn't matter who's
Mhm.
shouting, but the king is going to stop this, or how's the queen involved, like it doesn't really matter who says that, but putting their arm around Terry, saying, you got this, kid, it's going to be great. Somebody specific is doing that. So kind of thinking about
Mhm.
that, knowing you've got his best friend's dad seems to be pretty
Yeah.
important.
Mhm.
Adler, is that what his name was?
Alden.
Alden.
Alden. Yeah.
Right. Some of the right letters, it's just in the wrong order. And Rosa obviously is important. And
Yeah.
then maybe the mayor. I don't know.
Mhm.
Whoever you decide there. And then the chorus. And then as you're writing it, obviously you'll list out who's in the chorus. But if you do
Yeah.
the thing in the beginning, I don't know how to spell chorus, maybe. Um, then the ones that are important are the ones that are going to talk to him. And then the ones that aren't are the ones that he's just going to notice come in.
Mhm.
So, as you're thinking about this, you want to think about two things and then how they play into each other. So, the first thing is the action that's going to happen, that's going to provoke the emotion. And then how those two things come together is your summary. So, in your action, Terry is heading to the council meeting. and he's feeling a little bit anxious, right?
Mhm.
He's feeling anxious because this is his first meeting.
Yep.
It's been a big day. Um, his godmother's not going with him. At some point, she seems to be an important person in the town. So if you didn't describe that in an earlier scene, I would definitely describe why she's not going here.
Yeah, it's covered in the
Okay,
previous scene.
great.
Yeah.
Um, just because it's covered doesn't mean that Terry can't think this would be so much easier if
Mhm.
Marion were
She
here
was
with
here.
me,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That
all
would
of those.
totally fit in his character to be like, why couldn't she come with me, you know?
Right, perfect, perfect. Yeah. Okay, so that builds the anxiety. If you can, right now you have the first two paragraphs of Terry getting ready by himself, and then he's meeting his friend. Maybe
Mhm.
his friend shows up at his door and says, my dad sent me so that we could walk together, or my dad left early and I was nervous, so I figured we could walk together, right? Like
Mhm.
giving them a chance to talk to each other. Like, what do we expect? Should, like, just the ability to externalize emotion is
Mhm.
always easier on the page than that internalization. Sometimes
Yeah,
we
for
write that
sure.
internalization, and because we don't have anything to play off of, the physicality of the emotion doesn't come through as strong as we want. But if we have, his friend showing up and his friend keeps picking things up and putting them down, and he says, hey, can you stop touching all the stuff? And he's going to be like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He can be like, I'm nervous too, but you don't see me, whatever. You know how
Yeah.
14-year-olds do,
Yes.
right? Like,
Picking on each
so
other.
right, exactly. Okay, so they have some anxiety when they're heading, and then when they first get there, that anxiety maybe changes. Here's the key to emotional beat planning.
Hmm.
Anxiety works as an emotion, but you can't have anxiety for a third of your scene. That anxiety has to grow. It either has to ebb or it has to flow. It has to get bigger and turn into kind of a paralysis, or it has to get smaller and turn into bravery, right? It can't just stay anxiety for too long, because that's when readers are like, start to get uncomfortable. So in this case, I'm going to go more to what you were saying on the side of he's nervous about speaking in
Hmm.
front of people because he's kind of gone, like, he's comfortable talking to his godmother. Maybe he's comfortable talking to Kieran's dad, but maybe he's not comfortable talking to all of these people. So he's going to retreat a little bit
Hmm.
when they arrive at it's the tavern.
Yeah.
Okay. He's going to kind of retreat, and then you can have some of the council members talk to him, and that's going to help him relax and know what to expect. Okay. And again, by giving them conversation, you allow more back and forth between characters, which gives you more of that opportunity to show those emotional elements. It's harder to show the physicality of the emotion when you have big paragraphs of people speaking
Hmm.
and you only have 3 or 4 words. But if you have 3 or 4 words every 2 or 3 lines, that adds up really fast.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the meeting starts. And again, you can change this however you want, but just as an example, based off of kind of what I was saying, um, the mayor introduces the boys and gives the summary, right? So now he kind of retreated into himself, and now he has to be brave, right? He takes a
Mhm.
deep breath. And this is where you can also think about the body language if you're struggling with how to get those emotions across. The anxiety can be um, uh, I used the example of picking up and putting things down for Kieran, so I didn't want to do it
Mhm.
here. So maybe he
Yeah.
keeps checking. I swear I can type his appearance. Maybe he's rehearsing story.
Yeah,
I don't know.
one thing that his character I know tends to do when he gets anxious is to like rub something or touch something, to have like a sensory,
Mm,
like a grounding thing. So he has this thing that he wears on his wrist that he touches sometimes,
mm,
or he'll, like if he's sitting at the table, he would like rub the surface of the wood or something like that. Um, and that's one of the things
perfect.
that I've specifically given to his character as a, action to show his anxiety and um, in a more physical way.
Good. Perfect. That works really well. Just, have him do a little bit of that. Um, you can also add that to like swallowing or looking around or not looking at anybody in the eye, especially as he's getting into the retreating. Maybe he stands behind Kieran. Maybe he doesn't, I'm going to use the not looking people in the eyes here,
Mhm.
avoids eye contact. When he's being brave, maybe he squares the shoulders. I don't know how to spell words. I'm sure you can figure that out. Um, okay, so the
Close enough.
idea, thank you. We'll spell check it. But the idea being we want to think about the actions, the emotion that they provoke, what needs to happen for the actions and the emotions to come together, and then how does that manifest for your character? So the boys start telling their story. And I'm actually not going to say the action is the telling the story. And I'm going to make the action here the town's divided. And again, I'm playing with your story here. You'll figure it out how it works
Mhm.
just to kind of show you how big it can get. And then you can dial it back
Yeah.
on what they saw. And now that bravery maybe leads to confusion or maybe it leads a little bit to anger. Like, no, we saw
Mm.
this and you're saying that that's not true, but it is. We saw it happen, right? Like, so you can kind of think about what emotion you want there. I'm just going to give you those two. Um, However you decide you want that to happen. And then this is where you would put the notes about kind of who thinks action should happen and who thinks we should wait and see. And then whatever your body language is to match the anger. If it's anger, maybe clenched fists, um, glaring at people, um, elbowing his buddy, a lot of like if it's confusion, it can be much more subtle, maybe quieter, like sitting down and watching, looking back and forth between people, looking to the people he knows and trusts to make the decisions, nodding with the things that make sense, but then being surprised by hearing the other perspective of it. Maybe a little bit of head scratching only because my head itched right at that moment. Like however you wanna do that. And then you can have Rosa reveal herself. And I would do this in two parts. I would have her kind of reveal herself and talk a little bit about the movement. And then again, Terry's response to that can be shock, right? Like, there's no way, like, this can't have been going on for as long as you all are saying that it's been going on. We would have heard. Or it can be disbelief. None of those things can happen. Or it can just be an escalation of anger, right? And that anger
Mm-hmm.
can be first, it could be directed at part of the crowd, and then it could be at the king and the prince and everybody else, right? Like teenage anger can just have no bounds, right? Like you can kind of make it go wherever you want. As she's revealing herself, thinking about how that plays off of the town's division. Um, you might also, sorry, I'm gonna move this revelation real quick, because you also want to talk about the flowers and the dark spot. Let that all
Oh yeah.
kind of come out. And these two, again, are interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what you decide in the emotions, if he goes to confusion and then they talk about the dark spots, and that's when everybody starts saying nobody believes him, that's where the anger can happen. If you
Mm-hmm.
decide he wants to be angry here, then maybe the dad's like, okay, okay, we don't agree on what they saw with the men, but tell them about the flowers. And he starts talking about the flowers, and now everybody believes them about the flowers, or they don't think it means what they think it means, or whatever it is, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's where you play with how you reveal your story is based off of the emotion you want to portray. Because if at the end you want that anger to be explosive into action, I am going to do something because I'm not going to stand by and let this happen, then you want the anger to kind of be your thread. If you
Mm-hmm.
want him to be more of that, I want to help, helping is the right thing to do, but I'm just 14 and I don't really know what I can do. If that's what you want at the end, then you can have a little bit of anger, you can have a little bit of confusion, you can have some fear built into this, especially as Rosa starts telling her story, the story of loss and tragedy. That's going to have some fear.
Mm-hmm.
How that fear falls to your reader makes a difference if it comes after anger or if it comes after confusion. What comes
Mm-hmm.
after that fear changes based off of what came before it and where you want the end to happen.
Yeah.
So, this is what I would recommend that you do when you have a story that's as text and information heavy as yours is. You've got a lot of information here. You have to tell the backstory, you have to talk about the prince, you have to talk about the king, you have to talk about the queen, you have to talk about why the queen is here, you have to talk about the fact that Rosa thinks that the way to stop the prince is to actually control the queen, that and she has information that the queen was here, or the queen's person was here, like whatever it is, like thinking about how all of those elements change Terry's emotional story. That's going to
Mm-hmm.
help you introduce the right order for them and start to turn your story from this person is talking and this person is talking and this person is talking to you have a group of people who all want to talk at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
maybe to the point where the boys have a story to tell, Rosa has a story to tell, and nobody's listening. So Rosa has to stand up and slam her hands on the table and be like, you all are a bunch of idiots. Let me tell you what this is going to look like. Look at your daughter over there. And maybe she points to the barkeep's daughter and she's like, do you want to see her violated? Do you want to see, and then points to the other children playing in the back, do you want to see their bodies burned, right? Like whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
that really emotional outburst. Or
Yeah.
does she stay much more reserved? Her actions of her reservation or anger are going to impact Terry as well. So you can
Mm-hmm.
pick Terry's emotion and work backward, or you can pick her emotion and work forward.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, that was a lot. What questions do you have?
Um, it's really good. Um, I know we were talking about, and this is just kind of a something for me to kind of process through, but also I wanted to get your thoughts on it. Where he's talking about the flowers in the dark spot. Um, he actually didn't tell anybody about that.
Mm.
And so that's why he's like whispering it to the side to Karn as they're, kind of things are starting to sort of simmer down with the council meeting. And they are like, the adults are talking logistics. So the boys are like, oh, we're going to have our little side conversation over here. And he's like, oh, you remember that thing I saw when we were out in the field and you didn't believe I saw anything, but I talked to Marion and this is what she said. And then he says the word core, which everybody knows what that is. And it's, this dark, scary thing that's, evil magic. And nobody really believes it's real, but they also know that it's real. It's kind of one of those things that it's
Mm.
like, we know it exists, but we want to pretend it doesn't. And so that's why Rosa, when she's like walking by, all of a sudden she hears that word and she's like, whoa, instantly keys in on it.
Okay.
So that's why that falls at that point in the scene right now. So
Mm.
if I move it up, I would have to kind of reframe the context around it a little bit, which I'm okay doing if I need to,
Hmm.
but I'm just kind of trying to figure out, how that flow, because does having it at
Yep.
the end, does that kind of change or like not give me a good setup, I guess, for what's coming next?
So as I was reading it right now, um, similar to the way that they introduced the boys in the council meeting, it feels like a setup. It feels like
Mm,
you needed to have a council meeting and you needed to have a segue into the boys talking. So when Terry shouted out, "What about the king?" it gave Alden the ability to segue into that versus, hey, if this meeting is called because of what they saw, they're going to talk about that first.
yeah,
What you're talking about with the flowers and the core is the same thing. Am I saying that right, core?
yeah.
Okay. So if Marion told Terry that the black thing that he saw in the flower that Kern didn't think was a real thing was the the core, the first
Hmm.
thing Terry is going to say to Kieran is, "You didn't believe me when I saw it, but guess what? Marion said it was core." And
Hmm.
now, if everybody knows about this, then Terry and Kern are going to go directly to Alden and be like, "We didn't tell you this thing, but you got to know about this thing that's happening,"
Hmm.
right? The That intensity of impact is going to change necessarily the trajectory of what's happening. Or maybe Marion told Terry not to tell anyone else about it, but Kern already went home and was telling his dad about what happened and was like, and that happened right after Terry stumbled over the flowers and swore to me that something black was on there. And Kern's like, my dad said that you better be prepared to talk about that because he says it's the core, right? So even though Terry didn't tell anybody about it, somebody else was there with him. But if it has
Yeah.
that much of an impact that the whole room is going to stop the minute the
Hmm.
word is said, then it needs to be elevated into the conversation or into the scene a little bit more because it's not just one or the other. It seems like the fact that the magic was in the flower that just happens to be in the flowers that Marion uses for the lace, which is what the queen wants. It feels like that's like a bigger thread that you want to pull
Hmm.
together. So you either want it to be, no, we're not talking about that. Nobody's saying anything. Marion warned me, you can't tell anybody about that, and they have this kind of secret meeting in the anxiety and in this anxiety first beat while they're heading there, and then they're
Yeah.
not going to say anything until somebody else brings up magic as it relates to something else. And that's when Kern looks at Terry and is like, you have to tell. And Terry says, no, Marion
Hmm.
told me not to tell. And Kieran says, look at what's happening here. They need to know. You can't hide this.
Hmm.
Marion will understand. And that's when it comes out in the conversation. So if it
Okay.
really has that much weight, breaking the two scenes so that she just happens to be walking by at the exact moment they say the thing
Hmm.
feels a little serendipitous where it feels like it can
Yeah.
have much more impact if you weave it into the story. And it really does
Okay.
seem like this scene is what's setting you up for the rest of the plot. It's like all the
Hmm.
things coming together. The prince's bad behavior, the fact that the king no longer has control, the fact that the queen has more control than anyone thinks she has, the fact that this village is important because of the queen being here and the godmother, and now the core is showing up here. All of those things kind of coming together. The it almost feels like this is the reason that this story exists. So just let us have all of it. It'll have a bigger emotional impact. That's just one person's opinion though. So you're the
Yeah.
author. It's your story.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think I can, kind of rearrange things and make it work,
mhm.
to where that, comes forward earlier in the story. Um, yeah.
And if you really want it to be, they don't get a chance to talk about it to the end, you can totally make that happen. Just have mention of it in the early part, because if it's right at the tip of Terry's mind, when he sees his friend, he's going to want to talk about it. So maybe he says to Terry right up front, Marion told me we're not allowed to tell anyone about this. And Karen can be like, tell anybody about what? The fact that you imagine things in the forest? Of course, I'm not going to tell anybody
Hmm.
that. That's going to make me sound crazy, not just you. So they
Yeah.
leave it alone, they leave it alone, they leave it alone. Then there's some action happening here. And then something happens, and the boys start joking about it again, and somebody
Hmm.
else overhears it, not necessarily Rosa, because again, if Rosa's
Hmm.
creating a plan with everybody else, her focus is going to be on the planning, not on these boys. Maybe it's one of the little kids that hears the word core and goes running to their father crying, and the dad's like,
Hmm.
what's wrong with you, and they can like point to the bigger boys, and that's when it comes out. So you
Yeah.
absolutely can put it anywhere in the story you want, but my recommendation is to think about the emotional value of that conversation and what it does to the reader's journey. If you need a high point or if you need a low point, because you can't just have your readers at high impact emotion all the way across your scene, it exhausts them. You need to have a little bit of an ebb and a little bit of a flow, which is why we were looking at the beginning where there's some anxiety and then there's a retreat and then there's some bravery and then that bravery changes into something else which can grow or can ebb and flow, until you get to a place of this kind of culmination of fear. Um,
Yeah.
and who knows, maybe as you're telling the story, um, as Rosa is leaving her village, she's seeing this magic everywhere and she's bringing it up. And that's when Terry makes the decision that, oh, wait, I need to tell everybody this. So
Yeah.
you can kind of put it in any way you want, but the emotional payoff is what your reader is going to get out of this scene if you structure the information flow based off of emotion, not based off of the story.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes really good sense. I like that.
Yeah. So, and you are the author, you know where your story is going, you know what you want your reader to see in Terry in this scene as a glimpse of where he's going to be at the end of this book and then at the end of the epic. So creating that emotion to give the reader a sense of who he is as a 14-year-old on the cusp of being an adult versus where he's going to be at the end this is kind of the perfect time to reveal that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off. Thank you so
Okay.
much for sharing your story with us.
Yes, of course.
All right. Oh, I stopped sharing, but I didn't stop recording.